All right, let's move on to the NFC North. We have the Chicago Bears sitting at 5-12 at the bottom of their division. Ben Johnson comes in, also an entirely new offensive line comes in, and did a lot of work in the trenches during free agency, possibly to free themselves up to explore some other options in the draft. What are your thoughts on the Chicago Bears? I mean, and again, too, just because you did something in free agency doesn't mean you're done. I mean, Ryan Poles, and he did it. He's
Right.
done a nice job in the mid to late rounds here with guys and making those picks count. Could you hit that position, offensive line, again in the later rounds? I think for sure.
So
Where do you think they're going?
so like I think a lot of this is going to come down to the new coaching staff's evaluation of Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright. Because yes, they have reworked their offensive line and bringing in Jonah Jackson, Joe Tooney, and Drew Dahlman's a big deal, right? I think that's great. Um, the tackle position for them, like I still think that Braxton Jones going into a contract year, the jury's sort of out on him as the left tackle. Darnell Wright still has a ton of upside. We'll see if he gets there. So I think a lot of this is going to come down to how the new staff evaluates those two guys. Because if a Campbell or if a Membu falls to them, then I think that they've got to take a hard look at that. A lot of people are saying running back. I wouldn't I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't, because I do think it's a way of investing in your young quarterback. So if Ashton Genty were to make it there to 10, I don't hate the idea of it. I also think, like, if you're going to look at Ben Johnson's history, like, so where they were in Detroit, they built the lines of scrimmage first. So I think that's where we
Right.
have to look first here, right? Like we have to look offensive, defensive line first here. And they did add, they did add Grady Jarrett to the defensive line, but that's a very short term answer. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So like interior defensive line is something I would definitely look at for them there. Tackle, but running back is a spot. Like you look at what he was able to get out of Jahmyr Gibbs, and that was not that taking Jahmyr Gibbs where the Lions took him. A lot of people looked at that side eye, and it wound up really working out. So I don't hate the idea of what somebody like Genty could do for a young quarterback, just in taking the pressure off of him and putting him in a position where he's going to have a great chance to succeed.
It's it's going to be interesting, right? Because Ben Johnson really slow played, or the Lions slow played the Jahmyr Gibbs thing, and almost to the point where, and you would go and you would watch the team during camp, and you would see how dynamic that offense could be, and you could even see it when David Montgomery was out. I'm not saying they were better without David Montgomery, but I'm just saying that there were more possibilities when Jahmyr Gibbs was on the field,
Yep.
and I think they were harder to defend, but David Montgomery kind of presented some different issues, right, for a defense. But that was a slow play. And I do think that if it's Genty, I mean, then Ben Johnson, like you said, really has to believe that this offensive line is ready now. I think the defensive line is just as interesting because you had guys that you drafted for Matt Eberflus's system in particular, right?
Yep.
And Matt Eberflus, was kind of one of those old, oh God, the Rod Marinelli guys, right? And
Yep.
defensive tackles were its own thing and doing different stuff with their defensive tackles than everybody else. So someone like Gervin Dexter, who had a good year last year, and do you just plug him in next to Grady Jarrett and you assume that the new regime is just gonna
Yeah.
go? Or do you kind of pepper that side of the ball a little bit too? Because I mean, you have a lot of money invested at off-ball linebacker. Do you want to protect those guys a little bit and start to kind of hit that defensive tackle position, that edge position? I mean, listen, Tyreek Stevenson is still one of your cornerbacks that you're depending a lot on after everything that happened last year. Is he a Ben Johnson guy? I don't know. But you have Kyler Gordon and you have Jalen Johnson who are great, right? And so,
Yeah.
but I just think
Well,
the
it
field
was
is
interesting how they paid Kyler Gordon, because it's like he is sort of settled in to become their nickel. And
right.
it just sort of shows how Dennis Allen maybe values that position as a full-time position. Um, like the edge question's interesting to me just because of like they bring in Dio Odeyingbo at what 18 million a year, I think it was, right? Somewhere around there. And he comes over from Indianapolis, and they're betting on the come with him, right? They're betting that his upside's going to hit playing opposite Montez Sweat. Does that take care of the edge position then, or do you think you could still add there?
Well, I think Ben Johnson probably also, because we look at what he did in Detroit or what the Lions did in Detroit, but it's also like what did the Lions not do, right? And I
Yep.
think part of that is, hey, we found that we are one or two injuries away from being a team that struggles to do certain things. And so do you want to major in those things? And do you feel like they just keep kind of cracking at the offensive line and the defensive line
Yeah.
until they get something that they're a little bit more confident in? I don't know, but I do think that Chicago remains one of those teams that I think is way more wide open than anybody else is giving them credit for.
Right.
Uh,
Right. And I think it's interesting because they've got a general manager who's been building there. This will be his fourth draft.
right.
But you got a new coaching staff that's going to have, like you said, that fresh set of eyes on everybody that kind of maybe means you're resetting with a bunch of pieces of your roster that had been established before.
Green Bay Packers are next. 11-6 last year. Typical Packers offseason, I feel like, in that you felt like well, I love their fans, right? It's always like, hey, maybe we'll bring Devontae Adams back. Maybe we'll get you know, maybe we'll get one of these top flight wide receivers. But really, it's Mecole Hardman, and then you pay 4 years and $77 million for Aaron Banks to shore up the middle. You let Eric Stokes, your former first round pick, walk, and you get Nate Hobbs on a 4-year, $48 million deal. This, they need the rest of this roster to come around. They were the youngest team in the
Yeah.
NFL last year. I
Well,
believe the Eagles were the youngest
you also don't have a
defense.
resolution on Jair Alexander yet. So you wonder if they're just painted into a corner at that position and they're going to have to force something. The problem they have is that position is not great in this year's class. So you would think by the time they're picking a where are they at? They're number 23.
Yep.
Um, are they like is Will Johnson gone? Is Jedi Barron gone? I would think so. And so now you're talking about, are we better off taking maybe a receiver instead of a corner? They haven't taken a receiver in the first round since I think Javon Walker in 2004. And then I think like offensive line is always a possibility for them. Like
Sure.
I like they just spent the money on Aaron Banks. Josh Myers is gone at center. Um, right now, you're going to move Elkton Jenkins over there. Do you view another guard as a possibility? Where are you at tackle? I believe Rasheed Walker's coming to the end of his deal. So, like, I think tackle is to me I think offensive line, corner, receiver, like they could go in any of those directions. Corner by far is the most pressing need, but it might not be the one that I think has the best set of options there in the first round.
I thought our guy Bill Huber, who covers the Packers for On SI, had an interesting note. I think from one of the press conferences about Matt LaFleur and Jeff Hafley were talking about how they had to kind of switch their plan defensively last year because of the fact that they weren't getting what they wanted from the defensive interior, and I think that could be a sneaky kind of third option here that we're looking at, where they had to play certain coverages, they had to play games in a certain way because they just weren't getting what they wanted up front. And I think that could be one of those things where let's say the top corners, some of the safeties are gone. They can't really fix anything in the secondary in the immediate, and you wait until the talent catches up with your draft slot. I don't know. I think that might be an interesting spot for them too, just to look there. The Minnesota Vikings next, 14-3, but you get rid of Sam Darnold. You bring in JJ. Well, you elevate JJ
Oh yeah.
McCarthy to the starting spot. Are you at this point Aaron Rodgers? Question mark. I don't know. And still, I mean, there has to be a reason why he hasn't signed yet, right?
I mean, I think that's where he wants to be.
Right.
If you're asking me, he more or less told the Vikings that. So like I don't I do have it in the back of my head, like, would he do a Favre retirement now and then if JJ McCarthy has a rough spring, all of a sudden the motorcade is pulling up to the Brett Favre motorcade is pulling up to Vikings
God.
camp in like the first week of August.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like I don't think that's going to happen. I think JJ is going to have a good spring, and I think they're going to be fine. Um, yeah, this is a team without a lot of holes.
Certainly. And here's the thing, though. I think that they told you. Um, I think that they told you where they were going with this pick, at least personally, because you look at as soon as the season was over last year, they looked at their situation. They said, "Okay, we're bringing in Jonathan Allen. Okay, we're bringing in Javon Hargrave. Okay, we're shoring up the middle of this offensive line."
Yeah, they want to get bigger and tougher in the middle. Yes, 100%.
But then
Because they got beat up there the last 2 games.
the other part of this is that okay, you re-sign Byron Murphy, but then here's what I always think. Like when I see teams doing stuff like, okay, you're signing Jeff Okuda and just praying that
Yeah.
something clicks with that guy. I think what you're really saying is I need more at that position and Brian Flores needs more at that position. Brian Flores' strength has been a year-to-year evolution where, every
Yeah.
year he'll take a little spin on this defense and take a little twist on this defense. Some of your secondary is getting a little bit older. Harrison Smith, God love him, is coming back again, but is not a long-term answer at that position. I think they're going to hit the defensive secondary in the draft personally.
So, like, one guy, like, that kind of, like, makes some sense to me for them would be Malachi Starks from Georgia. A guy who's a really heady, smart player, and because of the volume that Brian Flores puts on his players, right? Like, that's why Harrison Smith's been perfect for him. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, Harrison Smith's been perfect for him because he's heady, he's experienced, he's in the right place consistently. So he's one that I look at like, yeah, that would make all the sense in the world. Um, I mean, if Will Johnson made it to them, like I think that'd be another one. Like like you got the injury concern with him. He doesn't have great long speed, but he's a really smart player. Bigger, longer player, like that maybe like would remind just from a dimension standpoint. Floor is a little bit of what he had in Steph Gilmore. And then like Maxwell Harrison, who has like great measurables, and you maybe feel like you could develop him a little bit. Like those would be guys like I think like that would be you maybe look like right in that range. Like that's the type of guy you could add there. Um,
Kid from
like the
South Carolina is pretty good too.
yeah, the tank, Nick Imanori, or
Yeah.
however you pronounce it. Yeah, like he's a physical freak.
Could you
I just
imagine like Brian Flores with his hands on that guy?
So yeah, like I think that would be like Pat Chung for him, right?
Right.
Like a supersized Pat Chung for him. So yeah, I mean, I think that would make some sense too. Like I think the idea of adding to the secondary 100% makes some sense. I think they're okay on the offensive line now. Like it wouldn't totally stun me if they were like, yeah, we're really going to shore up the interior, and maybe that's like Donovan Jackson from Ohio State then, or Zabel from North Dakota State. But they did add Will Fries and Ryan Kelly in the middle of their line, so they're all right there. Again, like this is like they're in a great position because they don't have to press anything. Like they're going to be able to add a good player and do it like in a way where it's yeah, we don't need to force something here. We can just let the draft come to us.
The Lions are their final team in the NFC North here that we're looking at. Do they, to you, have the most obvious set of needs of any team? And I'm not saying obvious in terms of like, oh, this team is terrible and they need guys to fill their holes. But like, I feel like Detroit broke down last year in a very specific way that we all saw. And that's, because this is a team that we were all projecting to go to the Super Bowl. And we are definitely on that
Yeah.
kind of a torrid stretch last year. I mean, do you see edge rusher? Do you see defensive line? Do you see defensive secondary as this is almost certainly where they're going?
Well, so you would hope at corner you get some natural progress from the guys you drafted last year. So you had Terry and Arnold and
Right.
Ennis Rakestraw as your first 2 picks. And so you would hope like those guys will take steps. So you lose Carlton Davis. So like your hope is that the draft pick capital you invested at those spots is going to pay off. I think they're good at safety. I think they're. I mean, they do lose. I think they lost out Melifonwu, right? But like they're. I mean, with Brian Branch back there, they're still in good shape. They add DJ Reed, so I think the edge rusher position, like I think it's going to match up nicely where there's going to be a decent option for them at the end of the first round, right? Like
Yeah.
where in a weird way that their loss in the playoffs sort of gives them a better chance to wind up with taking advantage, being able to take advantage of the depth at the edge rusher spots. So obviously I think guys like Shamar Stewart will be long gone, but could you wind up with like a Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, like somebody like that? I think could wind up being a nice bookend for Aiden Hutchinson. Because, Aiden coming back off the injury, I think you are going to be looking to take some of the pressure off of him. Obviously, Louis McNeil is also coming back off of a pretty serious injury. So anything you can do to kind of add a little juice to your defensive front, I think would be really helpful. And it wouldn't surprise me either, Connor, if we see them. If you remember, like the first draft for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, they took Penei Sewell, and then they took defensive linemen back to back with McNeil and Levi there in the second and third rounds. It wouldn't surprise me if they double down with a couple of picks in the top 100 spent on defensive linemen.
It could also just be fun. Like this team, we have no idea what they could do, right?
Yeah.
Now you lose Kevin Zeitler, and so you have Graham Glasgow as your left guard, I guess, penciled in at this point. And I guess you could really say, I mean, you have questions at both of the guard spots at this point. I mean, there's really you're not settled at any of those interior spots.
Which is weird, almost seems weird to say because it's been such a bedrock of who they are. You know
Right.
what I mean? The
Right.
offensive line's been so good for so long. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be stunning. And again, like they're another one of these teams like the Vikings. Like they have obvious needs, but they don't have a lot of them.
Right.
So if you're them and you reason, okay, like there's a great guard, like again, like say like a Zabel or a Jackson makes it to them, then you could theoretically say, yeah, there's a good supply of edge rushers. We should be able to get one in the second round. So we're going to take a guard here. It wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world.
Oh man, could you imagine my guy Gray Zabel ending up in Detroit? What a match made
That's
in
your
heaven
guy.
that would be. That's my guy.
Your guy.
That's my ore grinder.